Late night.
It.
Alright, mate. Let's talk about over-optimization. I think over the last couple of years, I've certainly gotten into this point in my life where I try and optimize everything that I do. I started watching Andrew Huberman podcasts and I started watching different shows and documentaries on how to improve my life. There was the Brian Johnson documentary and multiple different things where I started really getting invested into them and trying to change my life and seeing what I can improve. If I could become the top 1% man biologically, physiologically, mentally, then why can't that translate into the rest of my life? I started spending money on supplements, items like mattresses, trackers, Whoop bands, whatever it is. I got to a point where I think I found that I was almost over optimizing to a point that it was actually slowing down my gains. And I'm not talking about muscle building or financial gains. I'm talking more about generally just improving my life. I think what I realized is that the sharper the sword gets, the more difficult it becomes to attack something. Now you're probably thinking, well, surely a sharp sword is probably the best thing to chop something down, right? Well, there does come a point where a sharpened sword does become a double-edged sword. It can swing both ways and it can start hurting you as well. The more that I built my edge, the more that I found that I was actually blunting my skills. I actually found that there's a point on a curve, the middle point on a curve. That's actually where I was most optimal. It's like a bell curve. I found that when I was chasing perfection, I was actually stalling on my progress. I would try and get the best quality of sleep. I would set an alarm to go to bed at 10 o'clock at night and wake up on the dot at 6 a.m. If I woke up before that, I wouldn't I wouldn't get up and go and start my day. I would try and force myself back to sleep. I would take greens powders, and it's not to say that none of these things work, but they supplement the lifestyle that you already lead. And the biggest thing to remember is that unless your actual core lifestyle is well suited to you as an individual, these extra things aren't going to help. As an example, I bought a Whoop almost a year ago now. And I've found that it's one of the best things I've invested in. I've got so much data. I know my biological age. I know my variable heart rate. I know my resting heart rate. I know what my VO2 max is. And all of these different metrics. There's a list of 1,000 different metrics. I think Whoop were the ones who said that they know when a woman is pregnant a trimester before she is, or a month before she is. I need to double check the data on it, but the fact that they can collect so much data based on someone's general lifestyle and be able to accurately predict something that not even the person would know is insane. The amount of technology that we have nowadays is genuinely insane. My Whoop told me that I was going to get ill 3 days before I actually became ill. It said my recovery was borderline nothing. I didn't feel like I wasn't recovered, but my Whoop somehow knew. It's small optimizations like this that do obviously change your life. You can use it to your advantage, but it's a double-edged sword. I found that there were days when I would wake up and feel generally rested, but I'd look at my app and think, oh, my recovery score is actually 15%. Maybe I'm not that recovered. It generally didn't make any sense, and I'd put myself down for it because I was just staring at the metrics that the app was showing. It's the things like that that generally lead to a form of like paralysis. It's it's paralysis by analysis, right? So this is why over-optimizing generally isn't going to help unless you genuinely are at the bottom end of that spectrum and need to move yourself forward. In my experience, minimalism, so the bottom end of that spectrum I was just referring to, also doesn't help. Eating a poor diet, not sleeping that well, only getting 4 hours of sleep, not really training that much. These are all physical things. If we go down a mental route, constantly being on social media and all of these different things also does not help. I'm not justifying any of these different things. What I am saying is there's a middle ground. There's a point on this line. There's a curve. And if you look at that curve, the middle section of that curve is generally where you get most things done. If you refer to Ray Dalio's biography, he actually says he was using his wealth as a comparison. When he had no money, life generally was not that good. The money that he has now is ridiculous money, and he's still very happy. But he said that there was a midpoint where he was making generally, a fairly large figure, but nothing insane, where he found that life was best. That's where he truly was happy, because he still had the drive and the motivation to keep doing the things that he wanted to keep doing, but he also wasn't being chased by poverty and different things that are going on in his life. But the application still stands. There's that midpoint where life really is better. I've been using this system. It's called an MVE. Essentially what it is, it's a minimum viable excellence. What it is what's the smallest amount of effort that I can put into something to optimize my life without dedicating 100% effort into it. Let's take sleep as an example. We all know that humans on average should aim for 6 to 8 hours of sleep, depending on who you are, generally leaning towards 8, but everyone has to get a certain amount of sleep. One thing that I've learned is it's not specifically about the amount of time that I'm asleep, it's the quality and consistency of my sleep. I genuinely feel a lot better on 6 hours of sleep than I do on 9 hours of sleep. 9 hours makes me feel groggy and feels slow, and I feel like I've lost time during the day, which then demotivates me for the rest of the day. I've gotten used to doing 6 hours because that's what I've done for a majority of my life, and I feel that I'm most refreshed, and I also feel healthier during the day. That's not to say it doesn't work for other people, but that's generally what just works for me. 6 to 7 hours generally is that key point. If you take your finances, instead of just focusing on that profit and loss and trying to optimize how much money you have left over, why not focus on covering the necessities and having a buffer? And that way you can live life a lot more optimally. You go out to the public and say, what's your ideal salary or what's your ideal income? A lot of them say, $100,000, $200,000 a month. Ridiculous numbers. That's we're talking about the top 1% of certain countries. What you would find is that most people can live off 10,000 a month, 5,000 a month. Some can even live off 2,000 a month. That's the minimum viable excellence that people should really focus on. It's what's the minimum amount of effort that you can put in, or what's the minimum threshold that people can reach and continue living their life at an optimal level. A certain way to get into this MVE is focusing on the 80-20 rule. You do focus on that 20%, focus on that 20% that's going to improve your life, and you shift that at 70-80% of confidence. That 20% that you're focusing on, whatever part of your life it is, whether that's completing your work, completing schoolwork, projects, relationships, anything that it is, focus on the 20% that's going to make the biggest difference. Focus on what is going to change 80% of your life. And that goes back to the things that I said. A good way that I do this is I actually have my notepad. I get a page. I write down 3 non-negotiables and I tick them off every single day. They're the same non-negotiables, regardless of what they are. I write them down every single day and I tick them off. What this does is it ingrains in my brain that I need to complete those things. Now, those objectives, on a very small scale, aren't going to look like anything huge. They're not going to look like it's going to change my life. It could be something as simple as get 10,000 steps. It could be something as simple as drink 4 litres of water. It could be something as simple as try and complete 2 projects on my task list for my company. On paper, it doesn't look like much. But if you zoom out across a year, that's a very, very big task that compounds. If you get 10,000 steps every single day, your exercise regimen and your health is going to improve. Generally, that's going to improve. I'm not a practitioner, but I think that's a common thing for most people, that if they were to get enough steps in or were to be active enough, that's going to make them somewhat healthier. Drinking 4 litres, or let's take the project as an example. If I was to complete just 2 things on a never-ending list of projects that I need to complete per day, that compounds, and over time, I'm completing larger projects that are built up of these smaller things. It's about looking at the granular, nothing major, but adding them up over time instead of optimizing everything to the max. Instead of trying to burn 5,000 calories a day, instead of trying to complete every single task on your list, why not focus on the crucial ones that improve your life generally over time? Now, if you were to flip this on its head, I've also added something in called a kill date. There's probably a better name for it, if I'm being honest. But a kill date is essentially if these non-negotiables or tasks that I'm trying to complete on a regular basis aren't changing my life, I cut them off. There's no point in wasting time doing something for 3 months straight if it's not changing my life. If you look at something like, I used to keep a to-do list for my week. Keeping a to-do list, there's nothing wrong with it. But as someone who's trying to, grow my business, and I'm trying to grow companies, completing a to-do list there's nothing wrong with it. But it can become quite tedious over time because there's 100 different things that I need to be completing. Instead, what do? I create project lists, overall projects that have minor tasks inside them, but I don't need to focus on the little things every single time. It almost sounds counterproductive, but it works for me. And at the end of the day, it's about what works for you and what doesn't work. If it doesn't work and it's not changing your life, it's not optimizing your life, kill it. Move on, find the next thing. Now, you don't have to figure out those steps immediately. I'm saying this as if someone who's figured out everything that I'm doing, but at the end of the day, I'm still figuring out life as I go. This is just something that I've learned. And what I have found is that start with the scrappy ideas, start with the very small things that you know are going to change your life. And as you are going through them, you'll find that you realize what your next optimization or micro optimization is. It's like trying to find a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, but you don't actually know what the rainbow is. Why not start with just finding the rainbow and then go from there? Probably a terrible analogy to use, but that's the first one that came to my head. And you don't have to, perfect it straight away. You can prototype it first, test it out, but just go in order. Go in order of trying it out, improving what that goal is, and then trying to optimize it. You can't optimize something if you don't know what the objective is. That's just a fact. Now, you can have a few different things, but in terms of testing these goals out and trying to find that optimization point, change things once at a time. What I mean by that is there's no point in trying to, attempt 100 different variables and then not knowing which one works. The marketers out there might know something, it's called A/B split testing. What you're essentially doing is changing a single variable on one overall item and testing that out against group A and group B. Which one works, you keep it. The one that doesn't work, kill it, move on. And it's about changing the single variable at a time. You eventually become to a point where you find that optimal objective or goal or whatever it is. So it's about changing tiny, tiny little things over time. So if we wanted to bring this back to an example, let's just take health. I figured out that 10,000 steps works for me. But for someone who genuinely has no movement throughout the day, 2,000 steps is a fairly easy goal to achieve, depending on circumstances. But that's a start, right? And you work your way up from it. You then can add in exercise every day, or run, or whatever it is. It's not about the overall goal that you're trying to reach at the end. It's just about breaking it down and finding that mid-optimization. Now, another thing that helps, and this is something that I found that helps, is just keep track. Apps like MyFitnessPal, step trackers, health trackers, journals, Notion. I even use some AI trackers and a few different things. Keeping track of everything you do on a daily basis also massively helps. I keep a journal that I write down every single day. It's just the things that I've achieved and the things that I'm proud of. What it does is you can reflect on it and understand the micro optimizations that you made to allow you to reach a point that you are at now. Instead of just saying, oh, I took myself and made myself the healthiest version of myself possible, you realize the steps that you took to get to that point. And you're not trying to push to the absolute limit. You're finding that midpoint where 20% of that effort is changing 80% of your life. It really is just about trying to take action as and when you can. Instead of hesitating on doing things, just do it. There's really there's no reason to be worried about these things. Some people might say, how do I know if I am over-optimizing something? I might not know if I am. You'll probably notice delays in your goal. You'll notice issues, or you find that, sometimes you have too many options on what to do. You find that sometimes it's even causing you a bit of anxiety thinking about achieving that goal. It's the pressures of all of these different things. That's when you realize you're probably over-optimizing your own designs. Now, you could take it on the opposite end and try and figure out what if, you're not optimized and you're being too simplistic about it. You keep trying over again and nothing's changing. That might be one. Again, you face issues. So that happens at both ends of the scale. You find that your target isn't clear enough. You're trying to do something, a very small task, but it's not pushing you towards your goal and you're not really sure where it's going. Your results are really random. There's different ways to look at it, but you have identifiers on both ends of the spectrum. So there is no set answer on what that midpoint is. It really is just about trying to find that happy medium. There's different ways to do this, but you also know that if it doesn't work, is there a point in trying again? Potentially. But don't waste too much time on it. Don't put too much effort to a point where you're constantly thinking about it and you're constantly trying to figure it out. Because guess what? That's you over-optimizing. You've essentially just put yourself in your own trap, being worried about getting trapped. This is the hard thing about trying to be optimized, and that's why being over-optimized is actually not that good of a thing. It's that self-fulfilling loop, almost like a paradigm shift, where trying to focus on achieving a goal and trying to optimize to get to that goal, you actually end up putting yourself in a worse position because you're stressed about trying to achieve that goal. You can see how that might be self-detrimental. So in reality, it's actually easier to not stress about that goal too much, but focus on the micro achievements that lead to that goal. It really comes down to how functional do you want to be. I like to say that the person who's at that midpoint is actually more dangerous than the person who's at the over-optimized point and the oversimplistic point. It really comes down to how much is that person achieving and how much do you see. The over-optimizer probably spends more time talking about how much they're optimizing themselves. The oversimplifier probably isn't anywhere near that goal for you to realize they're trying to optimize that point in their life. The person that's speaking the least about it, or the person who's achieving the most, has already found that happy medium. And those are the people that we can really learn from. Hope that helps. I'll catch you in the next one.